Someone once asked him why he spent so many years talking to strangers about goodness and justice. He answered that he was helping them remember what they'd forgotten. A few years later, this man was sentenced to death, not for a crime, for asking questions. That was Socrates, and he's where European philosophy, as we know it, began. Today, we're going to attempt the impossible. Understand in 10 minutes why philosophy even matters, why people started believing these thinkers 2,500 years ago, and what you can actually do to finally start making sense of it. Ancient Greece, the 6th century BC. City-states trading, arguing, voting in public squares. And then something strange happens. People suddenly stop explaining the world only through gods. Before this point, every question had a simple answer. Lightning was Zeus. A good harvest was a goddess's favor. Illness was punishment. Convenient but useless. Answers like that can't predict anything, can't be tested, can't teach you anything new. And then strange people start showing up. They were called lovers of wisdom, philosophia in Greek. They ask improper questions. Thales of Miletus asks, what is the world actually made of? Not who created it, but what it's literally made of. His answer, water. A naive answer, but the question itself is a revolution. Because you could argue with it, test it, disagree with it. Anaximander picks up that thread and goes even further. He says the original substance can't be named as any known element at all, that it's boundless and without qualities. Sounds abstract, but it's essentially the first example in history of thinking about the invisible through logic, rather than through a god with a specific name and personality. And here's the first reason philosophy matters. It taught humanity to ask questions that myth can't answer. Nobody just took philosophers at their word and accepted their views. Their methods survived because they held up over time. Socrates never wrote a single book. He walked through the Athenian marketplace, taking apart any bold claim with simple questions. You say justice means giving people what's owed to them. So if a man lent you a weapon, then went insane, would it be just to give it back? His conversation partner would tangle himself up in his own words. This is called the Socratic method, a way of drawing out truth through contradiction rather than handing it over ready-made. Socrates' student, Plato, started writing things down. Almost everything we know about Socrates comes through Plato's dialogues. And Plato's own student went even further. Aristotle didn't just philosophize, he systematized. Logic, biology, politics, physics, ethics. He built a thinking tool people still use today without even realizing it. The syllogism, a strict form of reasoning, where two statements necessarily lead to a third. The classic textbook example, all men are mortal, you are a man, therefore you are mortal, has been used for centuries to illustrate exactly this discovery of his. 3 men, 3 generations of teachers and students. They earned their place in history not because they were smarter than everyone else, but because their ideas got tested for centuries through argument, scrutiny, and attempted refutation, and survived. Philosophy isn't taking something on faith. It's the one field of knowledge where you can make a claim 2,000 years ago and still be right today. Philosophy didn't just stop on its own after Aristotle. Greeks and Romans had always been religious. Gods were everywhere, and philosophy had coexisted with that just fine for centuries. What actually stopped it was something else. The moment one religion became the religion of the state, and the state legally banned every other point of view. In 380 AD, Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire. A century and a half later, In 529, Emperor Justinian goes further and shuts down by decree the last major philosophical school of antiquity, in Athens, the very one Plato had founded. The decree explicitly bans pagans from teaching philosophy. For the next 1,000 years, every line of thought had to stay within that frame. A monk named Thomas Aquinas took Aristotle's logical structure, the idea that anything in motion must be set in motion by something else, and that an infinite chain of causes is impossible. So there has to be a first, unmoved cause, and simply slotted the word God into the end of that chain. That's how his famous proofs of God's existence came about. Not revelation, but logic borrowed from a Greek and bent toward whatever the church needed. Doubting out loud was allowed, but only if the conclusion matched what the church had already decided. The philosopher Peter Abelard found that out the hard way. He was a sincere believer, but he publicly questioned the logical soundness of a few points of Christian doctrine. In 1121, a church council condemned his views and made him throw his own book into a fire with his own hands. Meanwhile, Greek logic itself didn't disappear. It just relocated. A scholar from Bukhara named Ibn Sina, known in Europe as Avicenna, wrote detailed commentaries on Aristotle in Arabic, back when Europe didn't yet have universities in any modern sense. It was through translations of thinkers like him that Greek logic eventually made its way back to the West. The turning point came in the 17th century. René Descartes decided to re-examine everything from zero and wrote a book called Meditations on First Philosophy. In it, he asked a question that sounded almost childish, but tore down the entire previous system. What can I actually be certain of? The senses deceive. Dreams feel completely real. So, the one thing I can't doubt is the very fact that I'm doubting, which means I'm thinking. I think, therefore I am. The moment philosophy stopped asking the church for permission and started building knowledge from scratch again. A century and a half later, a German professor named Immanuel Kant read both Descartes and his empiricist opponents, who argued that all knowledge comes only from experience. Kant wrote his major work, Critique of Pure Reason, and showed that both sides were only half right. The human mind doesn't just photograph reality through the senses, it actively builds it, imposing ready-made forms onto the chaos of sensation, space, time, causality. Everything you're seeing around you right now is already half built by your own brain. A century after that, Friedrich Nietzsche, who had read extensively in Kant and the ancient Greeks, announces in his book, Thus Spoke Zarathustra, God is dead. This isn't a scientific discovery or an atheist's celebration. It's a diagnosis. If you remove the religious foundation that European morality had rested on for nearly 1,000 years, people are going to have to invent their own values from scratch, and most of them simply aren't ready for that. So here's the whole chain. Descartes removes the church as the source of truth and puts reason in its place. Kant shows that reason itself has built-in limits. Nietzsche takes the last step and asks, what's left if you remove everything you could lean on at all? And there's one more thread running alongside all of this from the very start. Not about what you can know, but about how to simply get through today without losing your mind. That's Stoicism. Around 300 BC, a philosopher named Zeno of Citium began teaching beneath the colonnades of Athens. From the Greek word stoa, colonnade, came the name Stoicism. Its central idea is surprisingly simple. Suffering comes less from events themselves than from our judgments about them. Epictetus, a former slave who later gained his freedom, put it this way: some things are in our control, and some aren't. Our thoughts, choices, and reactions belong to us. Other people's opinions, the weather, even death do not. Most suffering comes from confusing those two categories. Seneca suggested a practical exercise. Every evening, review your day and honestly ask yourself which weakness you overcame and which one defeated you. Philosophy wasn't just theory, it was daily training. And perhaps the most remarkable Stoic wasn't a philosopher by profession, but the most powerful man in the world. Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius wrote private notes to himself while leading armies on the empire's frontier. Those notes became meditations, one of the most influential philosophy books ever written. Stoicism is only one branch of philosophy, but it's probably the one you can start using today. Here's where most people make the same mistake. They pick up Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, read it cover to cover in one evening like a novel, and close the book thinking, not bad, but it didn't really land. You can't read philosophy like fiction, so here's a concrete approach. Start with the most practical authors, not the hardest ones. Begin with Seneca's Letters to Lucilius, short letters, each on one topic, easy to come back to. Then Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, but no more than 1 or 2 entries a day. This isn't a book to read, it's a book to slowly reread. Then Epictetus's Discourses, conversations recorded by his student, tougher and more demanding. After that, if you want to go deeper into the roots, Plato's Dialogues, starting with the Apology of Socrates, a short and dramatic account of his teacher's trial. Then, for anyone ready to push harder, Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, on what a genuinely good life actually consists of. The one rule that matters for any of these texts: stop after every paragraph and ask yourself not, did I understand this, but do I agree with this, and why? Philosophy isn't information to memorize. It's a training device for your ability to question your own automatic reactions. Keep a separate notebook and write down not quotes, but the moments where a text caught you believing something without ever having examined it. One specific habit worth building: name your own emotions out loud in precise words before reacting to them. Not, I feel bad, but I'm disappointed because I expected a different outcome. It sounds small, but this is exactly what the Stoics were doing 2,000 years ago. Not suppressing feelings, but naming them precisely, which strips an emotion of half its power. And here's what matters most. Read slowly and come back to the same passage a month later. That same line from Marcus Aurelius about waking up in the morning reads completely differently on an ordinary Monday than it does on a day when everything's gone wrong. The book hasn't changed. You have. And suddenly it's saying something new. Let's go back to where we started. Socrates wasn't executed because he was wrong. He was executed because he showed people how little they actually knew, and that was unbearable. For 2,500 years, philosophy has done exactly one thing. It takes away people's easy, ready-made answers and forces them to look for real ones. That's uncomfortable. It's slow. Philosophy doesn't hand you instructions for every day. It hands you a tool you can use to take any instruction apart and check whether it's lying to you. Like and subscribe. Every week, a new complicated story about the simple things we take for granted.